Today is January 19th. It's the 19th day of the year, and this is the On This Day podcast. Born on this day in 1809, author and inventor of the detective story, Edgar Allan Poe. We talked about Poe back on October 3rd when he's found face down and incoherent in a Baltimore gutter 4 days before his death, a fitting time to reflect on the master of the macabre. But it is in the early morning hours on this day, every year for nearly 80 years, that an unknown person clad in a black cloak would appear at the site of Edgar Allan Poe's original grave in Baltimore with a bottle of Martell cognac and a glass. The mysterious figure, known as the Poe Toaster, would raise a glass of cognac in honor of the long-dead author's birthday, arrange 3 roses on the author's headstone beside the bottle of cognac, and then disappear as mysteriously as he had arrived. The tradition of the Poe Toaster begins on this day sometime in the 1930s and continues until 2009, the last visit of the Poe Toaster to the poet's grave. The identity of the Poe Toaster is never known. It's believed the figure is a man, and it's suspected that whomever it is, he passes the tradition off to a child, perhaps his son, to keep the tradition alive for nearly 8 decades. The last sighting of the Poe Toaster is on this day in 2009, the 200th anniversary of the birth of Edgar Allan Poe. Born on this day in 1921, Patricia Highsmith, author of some of the most intriguing and chilling psychological thrillers published in the 20th century. Highsmith is born Mary Patricia Plangman in Fort Worth, Texas. Her parents divorce 10 days before she is born. As a child, she has a tumultuous upbringing, knowing she was unwanted, and she has a love-hate relationship with her mother that torments her for the rest of her life. After graduating from Barnard College, she takes a job writing comic books to pay the bills, but eventually finds success writing psychological thrillers in a never-ending effort to exorcise the demons of her childhood. In 1948, she retreats to Yaddo, an artist commune in Saratoga Springs, New York, and it's there that she writes her first novel, Strangers on a Train, the story of 2 men, one a sadistic psychopath who manipulates the other into swapping murders with him, so neither will be suspected in the murder of their respective victim. Her debut novel becomes a bestseller, and it's adapted into a film by Alfred Hitchcock. In fact, Strangers on a Train continues to be adapted into film and television to this day. Highsmith writes 22 novels in all and countless short stories, many of which also are adapted into films. Her Tom Ripley character features in at least a half-dozen film adaptations of the novels The Talented Mr. Ripley and Ripley's Game. The most notable of these films is Anthony Minghella's The Talented Mr. Ripley, featuring the elegantly creepy portrayal of Ripley by Matt Damon. Other adaptations of Highsmith's novels include The Two Faces of January, starring Kirsten Dunst, Viggo Mortensen, and Oscar Isaac, and Carol, starring Cate Blanchett and Rooney Mara, adapted from her book The Price of Salt, a semi-autobiographical novel inspired by her own life when, as a young woman, Highsmith obsessively stalks a New Jersey housewife who later commits suicide. Her books are about crime, passion, murder, and suspense. But most of all, Patricia Highsmith's novels are about guilt. And not necessarily the guilt that follows in the wake of a crime, but rather the guilt a murderer feels in anticipation of the crime. Really, all of her work is semi-autobiographical to some degree. The guilt lingering from a tumultuous childhood. The guilt that accumulates over the course of a life full of passionate and at times reckless love affairs. When interviewed in the BBC documentary Highsmith, Her Secret Life, one of her former lovers, Mary Jane Meeker, says, quote, Pat always used her books to portray and murder the woman she'd last been out with. After we broke up, she murdered me very brutally in The Cry of the Owl, with a knife, several times. Later in life, she becomes a raging alcoholic, paranoid, and living a monastic existence in the wilderness of the Alps. Highsmith writes in her journal, quote, "I am attracted to the destructive for the same reason I'm attracted to alcohol. It has the power in a person of seeming to change the vision of the world." Patricia Highsmith, born on this day in 1921, passes away in 1995 at the age of 74 in Locarno, Switzerland. She leaves her entire estate worth over $3 million to the artist commune Yaddo, where she writes her first novel. There are 346 days left in the year. On This Day is produced by me, Dave Schultz. Thank you very much for listening. On this day in 1977, President Gerald Ford pardons Tokyo Rose, Eva Tagore Dukino, convicted for treason for her English-language anti-American propaganda radio broadcast during World War II. She serves 6 years in prison after what is later recognized to be a sham trial. President Ford pardons her on this day 21 years after her release. So if you're still listening, nevermore. Talk to you tomorrow.